Hello. This time I'm recording offline not because I have a headache, but because the only stream that I can do today without activating Goblin mode on the part of my followers is an OK Buddy Vaush stream. So we'll have to do that. Um, fresh out of the shower. I mean fresh out of the shower, hence this to try to encourage my hair to not fall in front of my face. Something important to talk to you about. Very, very impressing, groundbreaking topic even. Trans issues. Conservatives still don't get them. I know, a surprise. Let me run you through this. So Matt Walsh is coming out with a movie called What is a Woman? I'm sure it's going to be, it's a whole documentary, you know. I'm sure it's going to be a, like a groundbreaking piece of investigative journalism that really honestly investigates the heart of the issue at hand and isn't just going to be like a conservative propaganda piece that basically implicitly just says that trans people are broken and should either repress or kill themselves. You know, I'm sure it'll be great, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the question posed in the title, what is a woman? Seriously, just out of the shower. Like, my shirt's still clinging to my, because you never get all the water off when you towel off. What is a woman, right? So I want to talk about the conservative conceptualization of this question because the common answer from them is an adult human female. And I want to point out that as somebody who is, and I think it's fair for me to say this, something of an expertise in arguing stupid topics with conservatives. I've done it more than most people. Conservatives don't know what a woman is. They actually don't have a good answer to the question. I've had this conversation with them a bunch of times, and it's always, always, always really embarrassing for them. You know, like I would love to have this conversation with like any, like Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, whatever else, but maybe one day. So a couple of things to run through. First of all, the difference between gender and sex. Now, oftentimes this is posed as like a conservative versus liberal thing, where liberals believe gender and sex are different, and conservatives believe they're the same. Conservatives are lying to you. They believe gender and sex are different too. They only pretend not to when they're talking about trans issues. If you go back just a couple of years, you will find that the vast majority of conservative content making prescriptive statements on what it means to be a man versus what it means to be a woman aren't talking about biology. They're talking about like weird pseudo-evo-psych philosophy. A real man is someone who can provide, who is strong and honorable and blah, blah, blah. But these are social expectations. So if they believe that gender and sex are the same thing, why are they simultaneously saying a real man is somebody who is defined by this set of social roles that we've constructed socially and differ from society to society, at least to some extent. But then they're also saying like, well, actually the only thing that a man is like XY chromosomes having a penis, right? Like obviously they're lying to you. They believe that sex and gender are different. It's objectively the case. Gender and sex refer to different things. Gender being the social roles, expectations associated with sex, and sex being the biological stuff itself. There's not really like room for disagreement there. They refer to different concepts unless you like have a biological explanation for why women tend to wear their hair longer. I mean, you could, if you want to do some Jordan Petersonian thing, you can do some like, well, you see, the reason that the female tends to wear her hair longer is because it protects the neck. The nape of the neck is a sensual side. Like you can make up some bullshit post hoc if you want, but like you can run through a billion things, like pink being girl, blue being boy. Like, yeah, okay, sure. Find a biological explanation for that, considering that those roles were flipped 100 years ago, with pink being considered the more masculine color, Whatever. That's one. For two, what is a woman? I've run through this game on stream before, but I want to kind of give you a concise version of it, okay? So the what is a woman from the leftist perspective, or liberal or progressive or whatever else, it's always like a woman is someone who identifies as one. And the perspective from the conservative side is like adult human female, XX chromosomes, born with a vagina, has a womb, can give birth, blah, blah, blah. The issue with this, of course, is that when you take a look at actual biologists who describe sex in the human body, like actually, they talk about it as a sort of bimodal thing, because sex expression in people varies a lot, even within like males and females. So, for example, height is a element of sex expression. Males obviously tend to be taller than females, but there are individual males who are shorter than individual females. That would be an example of a sex expression which is variant. It's bimodal. It tends to push you in a direction, but not always. Now, not everything is as bimodal, of course. You have chromosomes where almost always, males will have the XY and females will have the XX, but that's not always the case. There are XY females and XXY males. I think there are XX males as well. There are a lot of chromosomal abnormalities. The chromosomes are basically just the pre-existing template that tell your body how to interpret how to receive and interpret like the following hormonal changes, basically. I'm not a biologist. It's very complicated, but it's like a preceding element that influences future stuff. But with that being the case, you can have XY females who still have a womb and a vagina and, tits and everything so clearly there's some variance. Now, the reason I'm saying all of this is because the difference between a binary and bimodal understanding of sex is a really, really big one from the conservative mind state. Because if conservatives' arguments are that most women are XX with a womb, well, hey, I agree with you, buddy. Most of them are. And some of them have, I don't know, huge dicks or whatever. It's a crazy world out there. The conservative argument here has to rely on a binary understanding of sex, which is just not... which is difficult to defend when you get into the nitty-gritty. But conservatives have never had like science or like information as a personal strong suit, so can only expect so much of them in that regard. Anyway, so what is a woman, right? So you ask like, well, what is a woman? Well, they'll say an adult human female. So you say, okay, sure. So adult and human aside, like what is a female then? And then they'll be like, oh, well, a female is an XX chromosomes with a womb and a vagina. But you can find exceptions to these things. There are, of course, women who are born without wombs, or intersex women who are born with partial or incomplete vaginas, or not vaginas at all. There's a lot of variance there. And there are women with chromosomal abnormalities as well. And when I say women here, what I mean is that like developmentally, for the rest of the features that would come to define them as a woman in a social sense, they grow up as a woman. Because if being a male and being a female, if these are like, if these are binary things, you can't really have an in-between. So the existence of intersex people, like they necessarily have to be grouped one side or the other. If conservatives are willing to bite the bullet and say, okay, you have males and females, and then you have like the rare intersex person who's like, well then in that case, you've opened up a huge hole in the argument that you can kind of put trans people into. You know what I mean? Like, okay, well, what is medical transitioning if not self-imposed, like intersex changes where you are born with a certain set of characteristics and alter them medically in order to do this or that, It's not as though medical transition doesn't like change elements of the sex of your body, right? Like if you go to a doctor, which is I guess the situation where you're can you hear the truck outside? I want to go close the window in case you can hear the truck outside, but I'm not wearing pants. Can I just do this? Can you just hold for a second? Because when I stand up, I don't want you to see my beautiful cotton briefs. My MeUndies cotton briefs, not sponsored. I hate trucks. Who invented trucks, honestly? Okay. What was I saying? We were trying to be brief, and I think I was failing spectacularly at that. Oh yeah. It's not as though medical transition doesn't like alter elements of your sex, right? Like, for example, if you take estrogen as a trans woman, so you're born male and then you take estrogen, like you can breastfeed. Like whether you're male or female, the infrastructure is still there, right? You just need the hormones to prompt it. Like, that's kind of wild to me, Like I guess I have like milk ducts as a male. The idea of lactating disgusts me. I'm so happy that I'm a cis guy. Holy God. Well, whatever. I hope not too much misery imposed on those who can. Whatever. Okay. Anyway, like there are elements of the sex that are changed, of course. The hormones that you take for HRT can change like big elements. So if we're talking about like the changes being done here, and conservatives are open to an exception being made for intersex people, I think you can make a really strong argument that medical transition would, to at least to some extent, like typically put you somewhere in that category. Even if I would consider a trans woman a woman, if you're to look at like strictly by a set of like biological characteristics, I think like medical transition would definitely put you well into that category. Um, but so conservatives tend not to do that because they know that would like open them up to, even if it's not like the full acceptance of trans people, at least it's some avenue of legitimacy for trans people, which of course they don't want to, whatever. They don't want to, fully enable. Um, so I guess when you get down to it, like at the end of the day, any conservative definition of what a woman is going to get into this granular, like, well, they're like, it's defined by this set of biological characteristics. And then you can be like, okay, well, what about these exceptions? And they're like, well, those are exceptions, not the rule. And you're like, okay, well, what are trans people if not exceptions to the rule? And then you're like, oh, and it goes on, and it never ends. And you're never going to find, like, maybe conservatives would find some kind of like hyper specific niche like characteristic that they can find like essentially a 100% male female differentiation, and then they can pretend the whole time like this is what we mean by sex. This one hormonal characteristic which has near 100% divisive representation in males versus females, this is actually what we mean by sex the whole time. When I say that's a woman, what I mean is that I've done like a CAT scan on their body to determine, like some bullshit like that. But of course, they would be lying if they said that. And it would, be a waste of time to argue over it anyway, because the argument against trans people from conservative perspectives is a spiritual one. It's not, it's like a fundamental one. Or to put it another way, imagine that in the future, let's say 200 years from now, there is medical science which can biologically completely turn a sign male at birth person female or vice versa, So like you could put a trans man in there who's pre everything, they've got giant fucking titties, whatever else, and you can turn on the gayifier, you hit the big red button. I imagine this is being done by the guy from Phineas and Ferb, the scientist. I've never seen that show, but it seems like something he might do. And then they pop out and, they're like biologically male, like in every sense, like hormonally, chromosomally, like with no deviance at all from expected, But even if you could do that, I guarantee you conservatives of that era would still say that's a woman, because to them it's a spirit thing. They think the soul is male or female. Even the agnostic conservatives still adhere to a kind of like scientism based, like pseudo philosophical essentialist understanding of how humans function. They would justify it through evopsych or something. I don't know. You can ask conservatives this today. I've never gotten a good answer from one. By the way, again, been doing this for years. I've talked to a lot of conservatives. You can ask them if there was some way to medically, like you got a trans woman, you kablow, and then bam, whole everything, chromosomes, it's all female. Would you consider that person a woman? And I really do think the majority of them would say no. Or like they would say yes with qualifiers, or if they do say yes, then you can start, really pressing them on that. Like, okay, what if the machine could change everything except for this one little thing, Like, what if it was just the chromosomes? Like everything about them is biologically female. This trans woman who's just undergone the gayifier machine, except for the chromosomes. But the chromosomes at that point, which are really only like a template to inform body development in this case, like effectively. And that point, if the body developed in a different way than what you would expect from XY chromosomes to inform anyway, then what difference would it make? It would be like complaining that a building wasn't how you wanted it because the building was how you wanted it, but the blueprints for the building weren't. But the building's already built, but and it's what you wanted. But the blueprints are different from the building that got built. I hope you understand what I'm getting at here. Very, very silly. So you can run this down. It's really dumb. It's annoying. Now, some people could criticize me here and say that all I'm really doing is splitting hairs with definitions. Like, you could do this with the definition of anything. And in fact, I have. What's a chair? You will never find a consistent definition that includes all chairs and discludes all non-chairs. You can't do it. You can't do that with most things, actually. What does it mean to be tall? What's the average height for a guy in America? 5'8"? I don't know if that's true. Let's just say it's 5'8". So is a person who's 5'8.1 a guy tall? I mean, Probably not. What about 5'8.2"? What about 8 feet tall? Well, probably that guy. Well, where's the line? Is there a way to tell? Is it one standard deviation? Why are we assuming then a normal distribution of heights? Like something like that. You could play that game with anything, and that's true. So, am I just engaging in pointless like semantic nitpicking to tear apart the conservative definition of woman? Yeah, I am. There's a good reason for that. The reason for that is because all definitions can be subject to this degree of scrutiny. The reason we change definitions, the reason we alter them over time, is because it serves human need. You have to understand that literally all categories that we come up with, all of them, are to some extent arbitrary and determined by the use we feel we can get out of differentiating between these categories. There are different consistencies for different types of snow that we don't have different names for, at least not colloquially. We do have different names for rain and snow because there's a big enough difference between those two things that it's worthwhile to us. But in a molecular sense, there might be a very, very significant difference between the different types of snow that we just don't really care about because it doesn't affect our experience with the snow. We have different names for different colors, even though there's not really an objective way of determining when the blue stops and the green begins, especially when you start color mixing in different points of the wavelength spectrum. We have the definition of tall is highly variable and not really subject to any kind of external empirical scrutiny. Our definitions for so many things are just really determined by the use we can get out of them. And the definition of woman that conservatives want to use is just not a useful one. It's just harmful. All you really have to do is acknowledge a difference between gender and sex, which again, conservatives do believe in, and all of the imagined downsides to my definition of gender, which is just a woman is someone who identifies as one. People complain about it being circular, but first of all, I don't think that matters. It's a mode of self-identification. If you want, you can say a woman is a person who would like to be, internally and externally be, adhered to the social roles and expectations associated with a woman, or at the very least, the social archetype. We have other stuff that refers to that, a la, people who identify as a gamer or a morbhead, as it were. Um, yeah, whatever the case may be, the arbitrarity of these definitions, it's near ubiquitous. But we do these things to determine whether or not it's helpful to us. You have to understand that so much of the stuff that we construct linguistically is like just completely out of hat. Like right now, this is a microphone, um, and this is a remote to the lights that are in front of me that make me visible. And obviously these are very, very different things. But you can imagine to a civilization which is pre-technological, let's say hunter-gatherers or whatever, they just like encounter this and this out like in the woods, like humanity 100,000 years ago or whatever. I don't think they would care about the difference between a microphone and a remote. I don't think that would mean anything to them. They might even have just one word, some word that would be like the equivalent of like manufactured junk. I don't even know. They wouldn't even have a word for manufactured. I don't even know how they would describe these things, but I certainly don't think they would differentiate them based on the fact that this thing is like built to receive audio signals and this thing is built to transmit electrical signals through light radio. I have no idea how remotes work. I know TV remotes have the little light on front, so that's lasers, but this doesn't. So yeah, well, okay, my ignorance aside, or you can imagine a very, very advanced civilization, 1 bajillion years in the future. They're all omniscient and omnipotent, and they all communicate with telepathy, and they can just manifest reality as they wish. I doubt they would have any need for a linguistic description that sort of differentiates these two things, because they would both be so far below the necessary technological level that they would just be like, antiquated manufactured junk. Like it wouldn't even be of a need. What definitions are useful? Well, it depends on how they're being applied, right? A photographer might not care about the difference between a hairbrush and a game controller on like a technical level. They might only really care about how the color palette of those items fits into the scene. Those really cool like Instagram post, like color blocking photos where it'll be like a photo of a sunny beach, but like the top right corner will be all blue and the top left will be all green, and like they're like it looks like it got color matched like by a computer, but in reality it was just really careful positioning. At that point, the main thing that matters is the color of the item, not so much its necessary function. So if they were to provide a description of these items, a photographer might simply refer to the color of an item, in which case the remote and the microphone are both black. I understand. I probably sound like really silly right now, but like what I'm talking about is the basis of the formation of language and the basis of the formation of categories. And it feels dumb to go all the way back to basics here, but we have to with conservatives because they're baby brained, who argue that the definition of woman is like this inherent fundamental thing that can't be changed. Definitions change all the time. They say, well, 100 years ago, everyone knew what a woman was. I don't fucking. Why would I care? 100 years ago, definitions for shit were totally different than what they are now. Why would you? Who care? Like, there's no difference, between changing the definition of woman over time and understanding the difference of a car changing, or the definition of a car changing, or the definition of any number of things. What acceptable outward dress wear is. Men knew real fashion 100 years ago. Top hats. I guess that would have been 150 years ago. I don't know. I'm getting kind of rambly at this point. I don't mean to. It's already been 20 minutes or so. I just want the fundamental point that I'm trying to get across here is that the definition of woman that we should use is the definition that provides the most utility. There is utility in understanding the sex differences between a cis woman and a trans woman, which exist. Whether or not the trans woman has transitioned medically, there are sex differences. But if you acknowledge that gender and sex are different things, which conservatives, again, do when they're not pretending not to, all of those potential problems and obfuscations disappear. You go, well, how can we tell the difference between... What if you're going to a doctor and you're a trans woman, but you say you're a woman, and then they're like, all right, let me take a look at your womb, and then they stab you, Like, okay, moron, you say you're a trans woman to the doctor. And what other instances is this like complicated? What if you're a post-op trans woman and that means you can't have children, but your boyfriend wants to have children? They don't know. Okay, well, there are infertile cis women anyway, so that's not really a new problem. And I imagine they should just like talk about it, All these, like, ask a conservative, what harm is there in accepting trans women as women? And you're going to get some crazy apocalyptic answers, and none of them will make sense, okay? There's no harm. They'll either say something that you could like easily solve with like 2 seconds of thinking, like, well, okay, well, like, what happens if when you're a trans woman and you go to the doctor and it could just be answered by like saying to the doctor, like, hey, I'm trans. They'll answer with something apocalyptic and nonsensical, like the civilization will collapse if we can't build families. Oh, and then they'll say something like completely meaningless and nonchalant, and just like it has no effect. Like, it's just so irrelevant compared to like the stakes we're dealing with here. Like, yeah, we'll totally preclude trans women from being like considered women because of like these few like sports events that happened where a trans woman did well or something. The funny thing is, you can believe trans women are women but still think they should be kept out of cis women's sports. I don't think that, but you could, because of gender and sex being different things. You could say, oh yeah, I accept trans women as women, but then blah blah blah. So again, like, ask a conservative, what is the harm of believing trans women are women? You're not going to get a real answer. In fact, they might scoff at you for asking that, because conservatives, being baby brained, they don't understand that definitions are something we construct to serve human utility. So for that reason, the idea of changing a definition to best suit our needs is kind of laughable to them, even though that's like all we do. You know what I mean? Like, if you take a look at the history of automobiles, aviation, computing, any technological field, there have been so many like branching definitional changes as different stuff has like changed and different stuff has been used. Like, you'll have like 3 terms that refer to some very specific things that get like broken down into one term as like a single unifying solution is found, but then like 2 variants of that thing split. Like, definitions change all the time, and they're changed when there's a need for them to change. And right now there are millions of trans people in America and around the world whose lives are materially affected negatively by the ridiculous notion that they're not the gender they identify as. And oh my God, spend some time around trans women or trans men. Jesus Christ, what an easily disproven notion. I mean, just from an intuitive standpoint, I'm not relying on intuition to form my definitions here. I'm just saying you've got to work, with some of these trans people, to look at them and go like, actually, you were born a man. It's okay, right? It's like that funny clip of Ben Shapiro correcting himself after correctly gendering somebody. Silly stuff. What was I wrapping up with? What was I wrapping up with? Oh yeah. Stakes here matter, you know. Trans people are cool. Their lives get a lot better when you treat them and accept them as the gender they identify as. Significantly better. Seriously, like, if the family of a trans person does that, their likelihood of being, like, suicidal drops to, like, 1/17th what it would have been otherwise. I mean, we're talking, like, the bar goes from, like, here to like here. We're talking, like, very large, you know? So this is meaningful. Conservatives don't care about trans people. They want you all dead, etc., etc. Have fun. Happy Pride in one day. It is not a coincidence that Matt Walsh would release the What is a Woman thing right before Pride, because he wanted to dominate Pride Month discourse with the schlock that will no doubt be his movie if I ever watch it. So don't give him the satisfaction, because it's seriously just going to be a rehash of all the talking points you've heard before. All right, good luck.